talk about a writer who certainly still a pretty well-known figure in U.S. cultural life. Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson was a was a freelance writer and journalist starting in the '60s all the way to his death by his own hand, and I think it was 2005. He became one of those people whose personality and his sort of personal character gradually overwhelmed his own work, but his work was quite good, and I think he's probably going to be remembered for a book that he wrote in 1971 called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is a fine book. It's sort of a short, fictionalized memoir of a trip that he took to Las Vegas to write about a motorsports race that was taking place there. And it became a sort of like fast paced, frenetic, discursive kind of book in which he touched on all these other little elements of what he thought it was going on in the U.S. I think the subtitle of the book was like a dark journey into the heart of the American dream. It was something like that. I should check for it, but it became one of these like, we're gonna take a road trip that we'll really learn something about who we are and what kind of place we live in. And I think it was the writer Philip Roth who said the '60s were the decades of demythologizing. It was a decade in which many elements of U.S. life were stripped of their myths for many people, in different ways, different myths, different people, and that it became hard after that to imagine them being remythologized. That sort of, we'd seen the emperor and we could, naked, and we could no longer imagine he was wearing new clothes. And Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas definitely fits this mold. It was like this: we're going to look behind the mask and see how the country really works. But it's a good book. It's worth reading. Maybe I'll do one of these on it sometime. It's tightly written, but the main thing that Thompson wrote about for his whole career was sports. He was a sports writer, probably more than any other single thing. He was also like a political junkie and wrote a very fun book on the 1972 presidential campaign called Fear and Loathing 72, in which he followed primarily the McGovern campaign, but he did spend some time with the Nixon campaign. And he wrote about it. He wrote about the political campaign pretty much how he wrote about sports and anything else, which was to sort of like, I won't even say it's not that he like really savagely eviscerated these things. It was more that he took a kind of really ironic, acerbic, oh, they don't really mean that, or they're just in this for this. And, he was really hard on hypocrisy, perceived or real, and just generally saw and wrote about the kind of mean-spiritedness of everything. I want to say that, it wasn't the only thing he wrote about, but it was kind of like what he wound up writing about, and it often took the place of these, fictionalized, or probably, heavily fictionalized. Maybe there's a little bit of reality in there. Heavily fictionalized versions of events that he himself took place in. He was one of these journalists who wrote about his own experience with himself as a character in the story. He didn't pretend to sort of like a high-minded third-person neutrality as previous journalists in his field generally had. So when Hunter S. Thompson wrote about sports, he would often begin telling you like where he was before the game that he was supposed to report on, and what he was feeling like, and how his hotel room was crappy, and what the bellboy was like. He gave you all this detail around the event, and then very little about the event itself, which he seemed to think was more or less superfluous. So this led to some pretty fun writing. This is and it's this was he didn't invent this approach, but he did it very effectively and he very funnily because his um, sense of things was just his manner of getting across in his writing was really askew. Um, so he wrote, for example, about Nixon's obsession with football and about how hard it was not to sort of link professional football with sort of orthodox establishment U.S. Authority in his mind, and how getting to meet Nixon and talk about football um, left him feeling really just strangely twisted and bizarre. One of his most fun pieces about sports was called "The Kentucky Derby is Depraved," and again sent off to report on an actual event, and given the chance to write about the Derby, there's a range of approaches you could take, but there's not a huge range. You would want to say which horse won. You would want to talk to people about, what the Derby meant to them. Maybe you talk to the jockeys or the owners about their efforts to get their horse into the Derby, this sort of thing. Well, he doesn't do that. He talks about the struggle to get there in the first place, to get his press pass. He talks about the nasty fans he meets who just act crazed and drunk. He talks about his struggle to find his photographer, or no, sketch artist named Ralph Steadman, who he wound up working with a lot. This is apparently where they met on this assignment together. And just generally, he makes the whole event seem like a huge exercise in human squalor. He tells a bunch of lies, he drinks too much, he just generally behaves grotesquely. And he implies that that's actually the human norm, that we're basically grotesque creatures and we shouldn't be surprised by anything we might say or do because there are no rules. Sort of like human courtesy and everything is just a sort of a light dusting of sugar on top of what's fundamentally a grotesque, bestial kind of thing. In brief periods, in brief chunks, this is a very funny attitude. I don't know if you could maintain it over the course of a very long book without it getting, just boring. But in brief chunks, written, I think it's important to remember Thompson was a good journalist. He knew good freelance writing. He had done a bunch of it. So when he twisted off to sort of write in this different style, it's because he was branching off of solid writing skills and writing instincts, and so he was able to, produce this kind of work in a way that was fun and pretty high level. But a lot of people have only seen his attitude, but they did lack the kind of solid journalistic writing ability that he had developed, and so they produced these kind of like shallow parodies or pastiches of his work. They just want to get to the kind of the easy payoffs. They don't want to do the kind of like the structural and the setup work that he did, so that his work would hold together. But it acts on the reader. The Kentucky Derby one, anyway, acted on me in about the precise opposite of the enticement effects that writers like Roger Angell and Thomas Boswell try to create. It is like an aversion. It makes you want to turn your back on everything and walk away. That is generally the Hunter S. Thompson move, as portrayed in his writing and also in his actual life, because he famously sort of retreated to Aspen, Colorado, and lived up in the mountains, with a bunch of guns. He was a public person. Like, he came out now and then, and he did things. He didn't and he kept writing, obviously, to the end of his life. But I hate all of you. You all suck. Go away. It's kind of like that's like the move in his writing, which is like, oh, this is gross. I'm leaving this scene. Let's get out of here. it's very much the feeling of it of a disillusioned idealist, of somebody who felt the grandeur and nobility that could be in a given activity like sports, or in his Fear and Loathing 72 book, he talks about how he himself is going to vote for McGovern, and that McGovern is one of the few people who understood, I think he said, what a beacon to the human spirit the United States could be if we could keep it out of the hands of sleazy car salesmen like Richard Nixon. I think that's more or less what he writes. And that's the move of someone who cares a lot. They care to, he liked the myth of the U.S. as a noble, decent place. He liked the myth of politics as a tough but fundamentally fair and decent kind of field, like democratic political campaigning, that sports had some nobility to them. At one point he must have actually liked these stories, and when he was disillusioned by seeing the reality of them, when you're disillusioned by reality, you can either turn away in disgust and go somewhere else, or you can engage in wishful thinking and tell yourself you must be wrong. Just close your eyes to the ugliness, or you can be provoked to reform. You can be like, oh my gosh, we've got to fix this. And for a while, it seems like Thompson personally actually did feel the reformist element. He ran for sheriff of Aspen, when it was not the famous national destination it is now, but he was going to, keep it safe from property developers and help the city. He was going to try to serve a civil function, and he lost because the establishment candidates combined against him. Now, if you have more legs for this kind of thing, you might just keep going. You might keep trying to reform. You might, say, okay, I was too frightening, but I got to get something. I have to learn to, if I can't get everything that I want, I got to try to at least get something of what I want done. This is that kind of accommodationist, pragmatic, compromising element of democratic political life, which some people can learn to do and some people can't. And the people who could, of course, moved on, in their search for a better society, by trying to make piecemeal reforms and trying to get some attention to the problems that they want to raise. And Thompson became a bit of a famed cultural figure for his refusal to back off of that disillusioned stance. Because if you're going to be a reformer, you have to sort of hold out. You have to hold out some enticement. You have to hold out some hope. Like, we could fix this. We need to hold on to this problem because it is fixable. But if you are sort of committed to the idea that it is horrible for this problem to have ever emerged, and then you see your efforts to fix it defeated, it's very easy to just withdraw. I'm not saying it right or wrong, really, but that seems to be something like what Thompson did in his writing, and maybe even in his personal life, though I don't know a hell of a lot about that. But in his writing, he pretty much held to that stance for the next 30 years, that things are not working, and we should not expect them to, and life in the U.S. is grotesque and bestial, and people are liars and fools, and those in power are corrupt and venal. And since there's always going to be a certain amount of truth to that, you'll never lack for material if you take that approach. And there's always room for people like that who'd kind of champion that point of view from one way or another, that view of sort of like the disgusted prophet. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, actually, sometimes parts of the book really remind me of like Isaiah, the book of Isaiah from the Bible. It's that disgust of uh, a righteous man confronted with shallowness and venality, and whereas the prophets withdraw from this into sort of anger and warnings and prophecy, but Thompson's approach has always been Thompson's attitude is more like, oh, screw it. If everyone's else doing it, I might as well go ahead. I'll do it better. I'll do it just as well as anybody, but more crazy, and I'll navigate it better than anybody, which is a funny approach in many ways, but it's one that, as presented in his prose, certainly found him an audience, because I think there are a lot of people out there who would like the idea that they see through the BS, but not enough other people do, so they will learn to navigate other people's BS and sort of stay above it somehow while also enjoying it. This maybe makes Thompson sound pretty supercilious, but I think that is something that is a part of the appeal. And when it comes to sports, where being put as a sports spectator is almost automatically a supercilious kind of position, where these people are out there on the field, like, doing stuff for you to vicariously share in a sense of victory. It's a little bit of a lordly kind of pleasure to begin with. You don't have to get down there and box in the ring. You don't have to race in the Derby. You're free to just sit back and drink bourbon and laugh. And there is a certain amount of that if you think about it too much, it could make sports start to seem real ugly. So yeah, I think Thompson definitely caught onto something real. He brought it out well in his writing, and it should not be completely dismissed. Okay, bye for now.